given you both flew during your military careers, Adam and Stacy, I think you're both likely familiar with FOD walks. Am I right?
Yes.
More familiar than I'd like to be.
What are some of the funniest things you ever found on a FOD walk?
I mean, honestly, like nothing, because like we actually take it pretty seriously. So
Yeah.
I don't think there was like significant amount of, but you know, they would find little things,
Like a
bolts,
bolt would be the scariest thing for me.
bolts.
You're like, just,
Yeah, like, this one looks kind of big bolt.
this looks
Yeah.
important.
Which aircraft?
Yeah, that gets kind of sketchy if you see any sort of hardware that's on the ground.
Yeah.
But I'm with
Oh, yeah.
Adam. You know, the FOD walks are pretty serious, so I've never really ran into anything suspicious other than like an RPG or the occasional bazooka,
Maybe some mortars between friends.
couple of
So,
ballots.
imagine this: you're performing a FOD walk, and you come upon a huge alligator sunbathing on an active runway.
I'd say you're in Florida.
That sounds like Florida Man was involved too. So, well, it just so happens a gator did take up residence and shut down the flight line at MacDill Air Force Base recently. Crazy. But don't worry, Alphas. That gator was wrangled and relocated and given to Joe Exotic. Not really. That's not true. Who's the guy that did the gators all the time? Because Joe Exotic, I know, was the tiger guy. There was a guy that used to do like alligator wrestling, and there was a guy down near me, actually, a young man by the name of Todd Love, who I've somehow never met. He was born and raised right down the road from me. Everybody loves him. I've met his dad like 3 times, and he apparently went on a show and wrestled an alligator, and he's at least a double amputee. I don't want to take another limb away from him, but he might be a triple. I think he's a triple. Seems
Well,
like a really like brave but insane thing to do as a triple or double amputee is to wrestle an alligator.
Sorry, I was looking up where MacDill Air Force is, and it is in Tampa, Florida. So I knew it.
Yes. We love you, Florida. Never stop being you. We love you.
By the way,
stay Florida. Well,
hey, Florida.
Let's get this beautiful show started. It's gonna be all downhill after the alligators on the FOD walk, but we're gonna do our best to keep you entertained.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
welcome, Alphas. Thanks for joining us. Our guest today is Sally Roberts, an athlete, veteran, and the founder of Wrestle Like a Girl, an organization that empowers young girls and women to become leaders while participating in the sport of, you guessed it, wrestling. But before we get to our special guest, Alphas, in the spirit of competition, we have an Olympic challenge for you.
During competition on May 26, 1912, American discus thrower James Duncan hurled both right and left-handed throws that would give him the first official world discus record, breaking the world's record for right and left hand combined with a distance of 252 feet, 8 7/8 inches. That is incredible. I threw discus in high school barely with one hand and came nowhere close to half that amount. The fact that he's doing this with left and right, pretty incredible. In July of that same year, during the Summer Olympics in Stockholm, Sweden, Duncan won the bronze medal as he competed alongside fellow American teammates Jim Thorpe and George S. Patton. A few years later, Duncan served in the U.S. Army as a lieutenant during World War I. When the war was over, he married a French woman, stayed in France, and was a founding member of American Legion Paris Post 1. He became the manager and caretaker of the American Military Cemetery at Sursnes. Is that right? Close enough?
Yeah, I like it.
where he corresponded with American mothers, telling them of his visits to their sons' graves. In 1920, Duncan returned to the Olympic competition, this time as the trainer for the French team. In anticipation of the Olympics coming to Paris this summer, a current member of Paris Post One has posted about Duncan on Legion Town and poses the question of whether other posts can count any Olympians amongst their ranks. What do you guys think?
Challenge.
I think I actually talked to a veteran Olympian. He's a rifle shooter for the show. This is before you guys joined the team. It was a while back. He was in the Army.
We don't talk about before us. That's so rude.
Well, I'm sorry, guys, but
I'm just joking.
Alphas, if that veteran, and the only way you're going to find out his name, because I cannot remember off the top of my head, is to go back and listen to a past episode, see if they're part of your post, or unless you have another Olympian in your post.
I believe our guest Sally is an Olympian, and when she, whatever post she's a part of, would be able to answer this as well.
True. Very, very true.
I often say true things. That's not true.
I think a couple of cool points talking about the Legion and the Olympics is the American Legion, you'll be interested to know, holds a seat on the U.S. Olympic Committee. And I think this is what you were talking about. Stacey, two American, maybe this is one of the ones you had on, but two American Legion Junior 3 Position Air Rifle National Precision Champions have competed in the Olympics.
Oh.
So 1993 champion Michael Douglas competed in the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney, and 2002 Jamie Gray completed in the 2008 games and brought home a gold medal from the 2012 Summer Games in London. So how about it, Alphas? Can you rise up to this Olympic challenge from Paris Post One? Tell us about your post connection to a former, current Olympic glory. Send an email to tangoalphalima@legion.org, or just share your story in the comments on this episode on our YouTube channel. We'll also have links to the Jim Duncan story on Legion Town in our show notes.
All right, Alphas, please stick around. We'll be back to Wrestle Like a Girl with Sally Roberts right after the break.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
Welcome back, Alphas. Today we're joined by Wrestle Like a Girl founder and CEO Sally Roberts. Sally, welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hey, Sally. So glad we got to connect outside of social media and on this podcast. Thank you for your service too, by the way.
Yeah, honor and a privilege of a lifetime. Thanks.
Hey, so I think I kind of already knew this about you, but I was obviously doing a deep dive researching for this podcast. And, for folks who don't know your story, you were kind of on a rough path early on, and you decided to join wrestling to get back on track. And I read that you were the only gal on the team in 8th grade. That got me wondering, because you're also an Army veteran. So always thinking about how one feeds the other or maybe prepares you. I was wondering, how did joining that wrestling team, that all male wrestling team as a young lady, compare to joining, say, the Army? That's also arguably very male.
Yeah, I think that my wrestling career really set me up for success in the military. I mean, first and foremost, it made me appreciate and find the joy in suffering. And depending on what you're doing in the military, there's a fair amount of suffering, right? I was actually reading a quote today that said, it's better to deal with, to be able to carry hardship than to be a burden on the world. And to be able to find that joy in suffering and to be able to work alongside men and women. When I was in the military, I worked alongside women, but man, it really taught me how to like speak bro language. So when I was deployed and when I was in the service and when I was in the army, I had a really good time just hanging out and building relationships, building camaraderie. And for me, it was about community. So in the wrestling team, you had community. In the army, I had community. And it was this language that I already understood. And I was surrounded by people that, I think that everyone wrestles with life, adversity, with challenges. And from my experience, the people that I really got along best with in the military were the same. They came from the same ilk and they also had those same challenges. So when we got together, it was like I never skipped a beat.
It's really funny that you bring up that joy and suffering because we all know people in the military that adversity builds character, but everyone thinks that that adversity has to harm you. And you can find ways to teach struggle and adversity and perseverance without having to go through traumas to do it. So I just want to say personally that wrestlers are some of the best people I know. One of my best friends he's not only am I in a band with the guy, but also he's my personal trainer. He owns the gym I go to. He wrestled his entire career. He was a state champion in Georgia. And so I wondered when I was growing up why so many of my friends were wrestlers. And then I found out my senior year when I joined the wrestling team myself. I played football from the time I was in seventh grade all the way up, and I thought I was in shape. I thought I was in shape. I will never in my life forget the exact moment when I realized that I wasn't in shape. And we had just gotten done with our first practice. And I had never been more exhausted in my life up until that point. I pick my bag up and go to walk out the door, and the coach says, "Run 2 miles before you go, and you better sprint the last quarter lap or you'll do another one." And I swear to you, I laughed. I thought he was joking. So my question to you wasn't just to tell you a whole story. I just wanted to tell you where I'm coming from because holy cow, did you have that same kind of I feel like wrestling proved to me that knowledge, that ability to tap in was something that I had. And so when I went through, I was in Iraq in 2004 in Fallujah, Iraq, and ended up getting hurt, lost my left leg, my right leg's all banged up. And that stuff that I started learning in my senior year when I wrestled were things that I took forward into my entire life. One of my biggest regrets was not wrestling. So did you have that same kind of self-realization of that untapped potential inside your mind where you feel like you can do nothing else and somehow you just keep going? Or is that something, that didn't come natural to you that you had to sort of build? Do you think it's something that can be taught to people who don't naturally have that trait?
I do. I think it can be taught, and I'll tell you why. So in 2008, I was ranked number one all year going into Olympic trials. And I had trained and prepared every day, but I didn't have a doubt in my mind that I was not going to make the team. And I would, after one practice, it was challenging, like you mentioned. And I felt like I could fall asleep on the wrestling mat. I was so exhausted. And I found myself saying, oh my gosh, if I have to run one more sprint, I would have died. And as soon as I found myself making that ludicrous statement, I lined myself up on the edge of the wrestling mat. I ran one more sprint just to reaffirm to myself that, in fact, running one more sprint wasn't going to kill me. And so I think that it's twofold, right? I think that we train and we start to build up our level of self-efficacy, our self-determination. But then I think you also start to hit a block in your mind where you think, well, maybe I can't do anymore. But when you realize that the mind drives the body and you line yourself up and you do it one more time, it reaffirms that we can, in fact, do really hard things. And the parallel for me is that both wrestling and the military teach courage, character, and confidence. And when you compare that with the joy of suffering, I think that leaves your world untapped. And, I think it's really important that women get that opportunity because, I feel like my success post athletics and post military is that I don't think there's anything I can't do. The biggest limiter is my mind. And there's a story there in and of itself that we might get to. But at the end of the day, the only thing that's ever going to stop me is me. And if that happens, I can fix it.
I like that inward pettiness. Like, oh, you don't want to run another lap? Watch this. I do that sometimes with myself. That's great. Thank you so much.
I always thought of myself on the wrestling team, but also when I was serving, that I never won anything pretty and I never won anything first round. For me, as soon as it turned into a dogfight and hopefully it went into overtime, I would always win. So I would always just be like, all right, let's wait till it starts to really suck. And then I'm going to excel because I really love it when I'm in that space.
It's such an incredible mindset and way of thinking about things and approaching things. And as I was looking at your website, I saw that you guys had a lot of great resources for girls and anyone interested. Things like advocacy and education, camps and events, and also some supporting research that you guys have done. And so I was looking at the research and I found a white paper that was titled "Why Women's Wrestling? Why Now?" And the paper basically concludes that in the 21st century, women are increasingly participating in combat sports. And it summarizes some of the reasons for that in the paper. But I was wondering, from your perspective, talking about this mindset and this discipline, this shift that happened in you in eighth grade and the skill sets that you cultivated in wrestling and then took into the military. But you've also really been helping to help shape this narrative for young women that it's okay for them to do this and give them mental permission to go and follow this path. Can you talk a little bit about, what's kind of been changing since you started in this space and what you're seeing for girls in the 21st century?
I am reaffirmed that anyone can do hard things. And in my perspective, far too long, we thought that girls and women should be these quiet, demure, very feminine and soft creatures. And I've learned through wrestling that women, they're either running from something or running to something. And the idea that women don't have to endure and they don't have to suffer and they're not dealing with hardship is completely false. I mean, for me, I got into wrestling because I was a derelict and I was shoplifting and breaking into houses and getting into fights. And I got put in front of a juvenile detention officer that told me if I didn't join an after school activity, I was going to face going to juvie. And I looked around the room and I thought, wait a minute, what do my friends do? They play sports. So I'll go out for the girls' sports, softball, basketball, volleyball. Well, they were all team sports and I was getting cut because I was told I was not athletic. That's not true. I was plenty athletic. I said, I didn't actually know how to play well with others. I was a bit more aggressive. And if we continue to think of our girls and women that are, and we put them in boxes, no one should put baby in the corner. And to be able to provide the opportunities that will facilitate interest and be able to bring them out so that they can own their space, their voice, their body. I mean, it just really, it's so empowering. And, right now, girls wrestling, it's one of the fastest growing sports. Why is it? I mean, there's a handful of reasons for that. Helen Maroulis was the very first American woman who's on our board of trustees to win an Olympic gold medal. You had Ronda Rousey, who is fighting in the UFC, Sarah McMahon, who's a wrestler, Olympic silver medalist. She's fighting in the UFC. And now that the notion, if they can see it, they can be it. There's so many more role models of how badass women can be. And it's not just there can be badass. You can look across the spectrum and you have some women that are exceptionally beautiful and just really embrace that feminine side. And then you have others that just don't care. And they're like, whatever, I know I'm smart, I know I'm tough, and I can do hard things. And to recognize that we are now able to support and embrace our women being a full spectrum and being whatever it is they want, whoever it is they see themselves being, and giving them the tools so they can drive towards their own future. I think it's the best thing for our girls. It's the best thing for our communities, for our state, for our nation, and it really is going to drive a greater global good.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And I just want to say, as a father of a 13-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old daughter, I love that there's champions like you that are out there advocating and helping to educate and create pathways to give the girls permission to think like this. I'm gonna make sure my daughters watch this episode.
Thanks.
Man, I'm so delighted to see that young gals now are not limited into what they can step their toe into. I mean, I think it was probably different when I was coming up. You know, there was always this, well, girls wear dresses to church and they have to do all of these other things. And that, listen, as a tomboy, it was like painful how many things were sort of put upon me. And if I had the opportunity to say try some sports that were not necessarily open to me at the time, I probably would have been the gal who was like, yep, I will do wrestling. So thank you for that, Sally, for giving gals an opportunity to try new things. And I'm curious, how has women wrestling sort of permeated through the rest of these young women's lives? Like, how does it carry off the mat into their day to day?
Well, what's fascinating is that we can look at our male wrestling demographic, right? They've been presidents of the United States, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. They've been congressmen, senators, and CEOs, leading public companies. And there's been a landmark study from Ernst & Young, 94% of female C-suite executives have played a sport. Okay, so we know what happens when you give girls and women the opportunity to wrestle. We're building courage, character, and confidence. It's laying a foundation for really the fabric of America, the spirit of entrepreneurialism, the spirit of innovation. And if we can create that financial, social, and educational mobility pipeline, we know where they're going to end up. Presidents of the United States, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. No doubt in my mind, there is absolutely nothing that is off limits when girls and women understand just how badass they are and what they're capable of, and knowing that the only limitations they have in their mind, and if they can find the joy in suffering and say, hey, this is going to be hard, but I love to suffer and I'm going to do it for a greater good, not just for myself, but for my teammates. I think the world is the oyster. So where are they now? They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're running for offices, they're sitting in the C-suites, and they're continuing to drive for a greater good. But you know I was recently just at Georgetown, and I was listening to one of the leaders that was speaking, and she said, you know, there hasn't been one conflict that's been started by two women that didn't get along, not one war. And if we can get more women to take the seats at the tables and start driving those conversations, there's a stronger opportunity to have lasting peace.
I love that mindset. I think that a lot of times, you know, one of the things that hold back countries is not utilizing their full population. I mean, you have a lot of countries that you know, I mean, we've been to war with, who are not technological leaders. They're not leading anything, and I think it's a big tie into that is that they're not talking to some of the most brilliant minds in their generations. You know, and you have people that you know, you say some people focus on being able to, or you know, women are now allowed to represent in so many different areas, and I think that's great. And what I found though is that, you know, it's not an either or. When you see people that work really hard and get really good at something, whether it's being athletic or whether it's you know, it's in a certain field, when you see people passionate about what they do, that in and of itself is attractive. So, you know, some people might say that, you know, traditionally attractive, you know, the issues that you know, that you brought up that women have faced for so long. But, you know, I think that as we move forward, people are going to start seeing the beauty in hard work and the beauty in the fact that I don't care who you are. If you see somebody walking around who goes to the gym and takes good care of themselves, or somebody who's athletic and somebody who's good at what they do, there's something really attractive about that. I was really insecure after my injury just because of, you know, my legs are a mess. And I found that learning how to accept who I was as a person helped me move past that. So my question to you then is when you see people that are dealing with disabilities, when you see people that are dealing with different things and you have to sort of adapt your training around those people, have you had to deal with many people with disabilities? And did you and if you don't mind sharing some stories, if you've got something about that, um, my other question was going to be about your athleticism. Was it something that was natural to you, or was it something that you had to sort of work your tuchus off? But I think You've mentioned that, but also it's obvious that hard work took a little bit of natural or a lot of natural athleticism and turned it into something that was literally elite world class. So I to clarify, have you had to work around your, teaching and coaching people with different disabilities, and do you have any experiences you want to share with that?
So just to start it off, listen, I grew up with two brothers and I grew up in the mean streets of Seattle. I love fighting. And what was helpful for me was recognizing that, of course, like, women are going to fight. Just like, look at across the United States, women are in fact fighting. And if we don't recognize that, and saying, if we look at our juvenile detention system, if we look at our prison system, we don't acknowledge how many women are in there. Those are women that have skills, talents, and aptitudes that we can use to cultivate and drive. We have to give them the tools so that they can learn how to lead themselves. And everyone can do better for themselves and for our communities and for our world if you understand that your mind dominates your body, and that's going to be the driver. And I did. So listen, I deployed to Afghanistan, and when I came back, I got accepted into the Army's world-class athlete program. I'm gonna say it's one of the most elite units in the military. Because in order for me to get in, I had to be top third in the nation, top third in the world. And I got in by the skin of my teeth. I got two-time world bronze medalist in women's wrestling. So I did in fact qualify. And what that did was put me in the WCAP program that is for both Olympians and Paralympians. Today is the Times Military Soldier of the Year. And one of the soldiers that I got to support, Sergeant First Class Ellie Marks, she's getting that award. She's a Paralympian. She's 7-time, 27-time. I don't know. She's won so many gold medals because after she got injured, she found solace in the pool where she could beat the water. She was buoyant. She could have that physiological expression, and it helped her to recover. And she's had such a tremendous success. She lost a leg. She's an amputee. She's still getting Olympic gold medals, and she's still continuing to fight, serve, and do what she loves. So I'm honored that I get to go with her tonight as her guest to the Reagan building and watch her get this incredibly prestigious award, because regardless of what your limitations, the only thing that ever holds us back is our mind. And it's up to us to determine, are we driving ourselves, and are we going to drive that positive mindset narrative? Or is there going to be a different narrative that tells us that we're unworthy, we're incapable, we're limited, we have a handicap, we have a disability, and it's going to hold us back? I mean, I've seen time and time again, the people that show up and hit life hard and get hit hard by life, nothing holds them back but their mind.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Sally, as you kind of alluded to, and if our listeners haven't picked up on it by now, you've had quite the wrestling career. You were a resident athlete at the Colorado Springs Olympic Training Center for 8 years. You became a 3-time national champion, a World Cup champion, a 2-time world bronze medalist, and an Olympic alternate. So you don't get those accolades without extreme dedication, like you've been talking about, to your craft. But there's also that piece of cultivating the ability to be comfortable being uncomfortable, knowing that every challenge that you're facing, every struggle that you're taking on is leading you to the promise of a greater reward. So how did these lessons that you've been talking about in wrestling and military service prepare you for the challenges you faced in the nonprofit service, building Wrestle Like a Girl? Because as a nonprofit co-founder, I know that, my competitive sports days, my time, in the Army as an officer, and then going through my brother's trauma when he was medically retired for TBI and PTSD, that was just the entry point into overcoming the struggle to really show that I was going to be able to excel in this really challenging space of veteran mental health service that was so needed for all these reasons. So what has that been like for you, taking on the challenges of nonprofit service?
I think that when you're starting to build your life plan, nothing is possible unless you take courageous leaps. And the first courageous leap that I did with nonprofit work was that I even had the concept and the idea of founding a company. And that came actually when I was in Afghanistan. I was on a patrol with the Pathfinders, and I had my female interpreter. and we would find women and we would collect atmospherics, ask them questions, and be able to report back to our command. And in order for me to do that, I had to build rapport. So that meant I took my helmet off and I put my gun down, and I had to go into really austere environments and just be exceptionally brave, because if I could relax and calm down, I could give that to the other person. And while we were out on a patrol, one of the guys that was walking next to me said, "Hey, look over to your left." And I looked over, and it was a gaggle of girls. And I said, "Well, what's so special about that?" And they said, "Well, listen, we always have had boys following us. I think we're going to give them soccer balls or candy, but we've never had girls." And I looked over, and they looked just like American girls. They had t-shirts on and shorts, and their hair was crazy, dusty, dirty, had sticks in their hand. They were playing stickball. So when I turned over and smiled at them, that was the invitation that they needed. And they came rushing towards us. And I made sure to give them all a high five, and their faces lit up. And in that moment, I knew I wanted to continue serving. I didn't really know what that looked like. I just knew what it felt like. And I wanted to continue having that feeling of service to others. So when I came back and I was wrestling for WCAP, wrestling, all of our best ideas happen in the sauna. And I was sitting in the sauna sweating, and I thought, you know what we don't have is an advocacy organization. And I had the idea that, okay, well, that's what I'm going to start, but I didn't, and it was going to serve wrestling, because there's that notion, bloom where you're planted. And I was planted in the sport of wrestling. I was planted in suffering, and I was planted in doing hard things. So fast forward, I was actually at a wrestling tournament, a junior high wrestling tournament, and this little girl just beat a little boy, and he said something to her. So when she walked off the mat, she started crying, and her mom brought her over to me, and I said, "Hey, what's going on, sister?" And she said, "Well, even though I just beat this boy, he said it didn't matter because I wrestled like a girl." And I thought, wait a minute, that's crazy. I'm a two-time world bronze medalist. You just beat him. I said, if he wanted to win, maybe he should start wrestling like a girl too. And that was the name of the organization that came about. And that was the origin of it. So fast forward, I think that if I would have ever taken the easy path, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And if I wouldn't have taken courageous leaps, I wouldn't be leading an organization. And one of the things that ties wrestling in the military to leading companies, whether it's a nonprofit or a tax-exempt organization, because we run this like a business, it's that you need a team. And when I first started, my founding board were my friends. They were athletes. And when I knew that I needed to level up as a person, I treated myself as an athlete, and I looked at my board as coaches. And I went out and got some of the most powerful minds in business, some of the most powerful minds in leadership. And I said, "I need for you to join the board." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I need you to mentor me." And I showed up every day to board meetings. And listen, Marianne Bruce, she's the board chair of Wrestle Like a Girl. She's a lovely, fabulous woman. She doesn't know this. She's going to find out watching this. I tell people she eats bullets for breakfast. And I've come out of board meetings like almost in full tears. And I'm like, okay, I kind of got my butt handed to me. It turns out I need to learn all these different things. And instead of just sitting back on my laurels and saying, well, the medals around my chest, they define me, I just had to look at it differently and say the medals around my chest and the medals that I had earned, they didn't define me. They only showed me what I was capable of. And I'm capable of suffering, I'm capable of learning, and I'm capable of growing. And so every time I did something, I just looked at it as a learning experience, because experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And with enough experience, you can really grow.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that.
Joe's got a question. I just want to highlight and reflect a couple things that I heard, and maybe we can even unpack a little bit after, because I know Joe's got a question. But joy and suffering, I didn't choose the easy path, and able to bloom where I was planted, and able to grow into what I needed to become.
That's right.
I took those same notes.
And that is the fabric of America. And if we can
that's right.
Subscribe to that. Listen, there is nothing that can ever stop the United States of America once the fire underneath the broiler gets lit, and we're going to continue to drive forward.
So what I wanted to touch on was that concept of being a high pressure performer, because when there's something addictive about that pressure, about waiting till Like I'll let myself get into a bad situation because I know like that's when I crank. Like that's when I come alive. But there's a trap. There's a trap there because sometimes you like and you sort of thrive in that pressure and you allow things to build up. I'm talking about me, not you. You may be like, Jenny on the spot here, but for me personally, it's kind of addictive and you find yourself waiting for that high pressure and it puts you in a bad spot when 3 or 4 of those things hit all at once. And all of a sudden you have to remind yourself, look, I may be incredible under pressure, but I have set myself up for failure. I want to know what your support system is like for someone like you who is a go-getter, who's somebody who attacks their fears, attacks their problems. Like what do you do? How do you how do you bring yourself back down?
So I didn't do a great job. And I'll tell you, one of my really dear friends, he's a retired Marine 2-star general. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, Sal, like you've had a lot of trauma. You've had a lot of hardship in your life. You've had to endure a lot of painful things, and you're not okay. And it's okay to not be okay, but you have to get help." And I have a really dear friend, Juliana Mercer, and she's a 16-year Marine Corps veteran, and she founded an experience, a company where they take veterans down to Mexico and you can explore ancient medicines and you get to really scrape years of emotional dirt off the inside of your brain. And I think if I didn't go do that, I don't know if I would be here today.
Wow.
And it was really about showing up for myself. And there was a time in my life that I didn't have the capacity to reach out because I didn't want anyone to think that I was weak. I didn't want anyone to think that I couldn't handle it. And if I didn't have that Marine general that I so deeply respect reach in, I don't know what would have happened. And so I think it is that challenge that we run with, right? Like, yeah, I don't want anything to permeate this wall that I've built up, but we have to be able to have trust with at least some people.
Yeah.
And it is up to us to make sure that those people that we do trust can see our hearts and see our souls and know that we are good people. We just get pretty fucking pissed and we need help, and it's okay to need help.
I love that. And that right there, you can't be brave without fear. And it sounds crazy to explain it that way, but some people like to attack the things that they're afraid of. And so you telling me that is really encouraging because I know there's a lot of people that are afraid to take, people that everyone look up to. It's hard to take the saddle off every once in a while and try to calm down and take some time for yourself. So I know that was kind of a vulnerable question, and thank you so much for being open about it. That was wonderful.
And I also just want to add one thing, and that's there is a Travis Manion Foundation that says, "If not me, then who?" And I've learned if I'm going to bet on anyone, I'm going to bet on myself all day, every day, because I believe that I'm going to come out versus someone else. Maybe it's that competitive mindset, but man, if you can learn that you're going to always be able to bet on yourself and maybe you're not going to win, but at least the other person might, maybe you will too, but bet on yourself.
Yeah. You talked about taking courageous leaps, and I'm curious, you've accomplished so much and had such success. What is going to be that next big blind faith leap for you?
Self-love. Self-love, like diving into the nooks and crannies of my pain and where it came from. And maybe it was from childhood, and maybe it was from athletics, or maybe it was from the military. And heck, it might even be from nonprofit leadership. My board's tough, but diving in and saying, how do you fix this so that you can walk around as a whole, complete human being? You can continue to be of service to others. And the way that you present, you're able to lift, amplify, and support and bring the best of yourself to this world each and every day.
Yeah, I'm going to strive for that too, Sally.
It's always about the pursuit.
Yeah.
I would just add Juliana Mercer. I was just with her last month advocating in DC for some of these breakthrough therapies that you're talking about. So it emanates, from you that you've had a chance to go and have one of these experiences and be able to reflect on your life and the journey, to here to now to present and all the things that have made you, into who you are. And one of the themes that I've heard, you talk about really throughout the conversation today is this this joy in suffering. But I think from a military service member perspective, you can kind of understand how that might make sense. But as it pertains to the audience, that you're going for with the youth and with girls, there can be a real aversion to suffering. I mean, it doesn't sound pleasant, right? Like, I think as a society, maybe some of the challenges that we're facing are because we're so averse to suffering, because we're looking for easy path, because we're looking for comfort. So how in your program do you address this? How do you help cultivate, that joy for suffering? And it's not maybe so much that like you're going out and seeking the opportunity to suffer, but it's that suffering is a very real part of the human experience. And you shouldn't be averse to that. You should just know that it's a chance to refine you into the greatest version of yourself.
Yeah, I look at that as an opportunity for leadership. And when we put these girls and women in front of people who are leaders, who can exude the best of what America has to offer, those girls say, hey, I want to do that. How do I do that? And we say, hey, if you ever get a choice, take the hard right over the easy wrong. And if you get two options, take the toughest one, because even if you fail, you're going to know what your value is. You're going to know what your worth is. And maybe it didn't turn out the way that you wanted. But again, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And all of the times that I have had the most sunshine in my life, it's when I failed, but I've been able to come back from it. And we have to be able to teach really everyone that it's okay to suffer. It's okay to endure. It's the lessons that we get from it.
There's a young lady that goes to a gym that we're at, and I think I forget exactly what weight she wrestles, but she wrestled in training with like a 225 guy, and it was something they both agreed to. And she said she eventually, over the entire course of the season, learned how to hold her own against that guy. And she said she learned more with that struggle of pushing herself into a match that physically being outweighed by 50 pounds for anybody or more is going to be really tough. And so, I love that idea of taking, when you have the time and the bandwidth to take that harder route, to be able to do that is really incredible. And then, like you mentioned and Adam brought up, taking the time afterwards to process that. I think that can be really important too. And sounds like you've got all that stuff sort of wrapped up pretty good. You know what you're looking for, what you want, and you have been fortunate enough to live in a time where you can surround yourself with incredible people and become a part of their inspiration as well. So I just want to say what you mentioned about these young ladies being able to step into leadership roles. You surround yourself with successful people and you become successful. You surround yourself with people that push you, who you have a like internal moral dialogue that says, I can't let these people down because they're pushing, and I want to belong to this group of people. It can be humbling when you first step in to that board meeting and you realize that you may not have been ready for something, but now, like you said, you've hit the roof and you know what you need to learn to raise that up. Yeah. I just want to say you're very inspiring. I love everything that you're saying. I love your personality. I love that push through. I love that punch through. And it was actually very comforting for me to hear that you also have the step back, because I think that's the important time to say, okay, hold on just a second here. Let me sort of refoundation myself and start over. That's you're really wonderful, and I'm so glad that you came to speak to us here.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add that it is my most fervent belief that the full inclusion of women is the task of the 21st century, and getting them into all of the roles that where men are. It's really important, because when men and women work together, that's when we become a stronger nation.
Yes.
You got yes out of Stacy. I like it.
My girl.
Well, we appreciate all the time you spent with us today. And before we pop off, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you really kind of wanted to mention? And is there anything that you want to share with our alphas that we didn't discuss? Feel free to let us know. Drop it on us.
Well, I just want to say, Adam already touched on it, but man, Juliana Mercer with Heroic Hearts. Wait, Adam, what's the name of it? I can't remember. Listen,
So she's with Healing Breakthrough now, but she's an advocate for Heroic Hearts, and then she's a member of the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition, and that's the organization where I'm the director of operations at. So it's basically all of people like us that have been through it, that have suffered and struggled, that have found some answers in healing in these therapies. And now we're advocating at the state and the federal level for thoughtfully and to bring these things online in the right way so that we can have widespread access, so that people can be able to heal from their traumas and pains for the ones that are, really struggling. So.
Well, so Adam just said what I wanted to say. Thank you. Good man. Thank you.
Well, Sally, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. We'll have all the links to your social connections and anything we talked about in our show notes as well. But where can folks learn more about Wrestle Like a Girl?
You can go to the website, wrestlelikeagirl.org. You can follow our social media, Wrestle Like a Girl. Twitter is Wrestle Like a Girl without any, listen, we didn't get the reduced character count, so it's WRSTLE Like a Girl. But please follow us on social. Go to our website, and when we have events, please show up and support. It's important that we support women's sports because the more eyeballs on it, the more money and revenue and advertising we can get, and that's just going to help us continue to push our mission and push the movement.
Awesome. Well, Sally, I'll be seeing you on social media around there. Hopefully I can meet you in person. We're doing this in increments.
That's right.
Yeah, I appreciate you. And thanks again for your service and what you're doing for young ladies across the globe. Alphas, stick around for some Scuttlebutt right after the break.
To look out for those that served, we must be relentless. To influence Washington to do the right thing, not just for our veterans, but for the country, we must be organized. To inspire the next generation of leaders, we must be united. We must be Legion, the American Legion. Join today at legion.org/join.
Okay, Alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some Scuttlebutt. Joe.
That's
what you got
me.
for us?
So there's an agreement that helps military spouses keep federal jobs in an overseas move from the Military Times. So a new agreement between the Pentagon and State Department will ease some restrictions for federally employed military spouses who want to take their careers with them when moving overseas. So this memo, signed by Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks and Deputy Secretary of State Richard Verma, strengthens the Domestic Employees Teleworking Overseas, or DETO, which should be a band name like Devo, like work them real good. I don't know. I'm trying to help them come up with their first.
Is that what you're getting at?
I don't listen. Your judgments are not welcome. Actually, they are, because they're always hilarious. But it's the Domestic Employee Teleworking Overseas DETO program for military spouses. Some of the we're gonna be like a mimic band, but we're really bad. All right. But some of the provisions of the agreement, the DoD and State Department officials will work together to facilitate approval of telework arrangements for federal employees married to military and civilian DoD employees and who plan to work remotely from their military managed residences while overseas. I think that almost every non-manual job can and should be at least partially at home. I think we learned that they worked so hard to make sure we could do it from home. During COVID, and like now you want to walk it back. I can go upstairs and eat snacks now, and you want me to be in office? Are you going to supply my snacks? You better.
So when I was talking to a couple buddies like during COVID, they're like, yeah, we can just telework, and that's not a term that the rest of the world uses. It's just virtual. It's virtual work. It's work from home. Does anybody know why they call it telework? Why is the government like this term? Is the telephone involved?
No, I think it's because they're going to tell us when it stops. They're going to tell us when we're not allowed to do it anymore.
Well, I'm like, is it
Does it have to do with like the zipper?
television or is it telephone?
Ooh.
Yeah, I think it was supposed to be telephone, but this isn't like 1994 where they're little see-through phones anymore.
Hmm. Well,
They had the little thing on the side of it so you could hold it on your shoulder. You remember that? The
yeah.
little.
Well, remember how it had like that
Yeah.
sort of S-shaped thing? It would be between the receiver and your shoulder. It had
Oh yes,
yeah.
yes.
Oh yeah.
But you bring up the good point, Joe, of look, unless you have to like physically be there to do the requirements of the job, and sometimes you have to, but there's just like so much capacity and ability to be able to do and even if not like all of it, like at least a percentage of it. And I think that goes back into some of the other guests that we've had on the show that are working on more total holistic health and fitness, and that's being able to have a better balance. And so like part of this being able to bring spouses over and keep their jobs and things like this, I think these are all really cool things, whether they use the word telework or virtual or whatever. I think it's cool that they're doing it and they're creating those pathways.
It's a raise. It's literally a raise. You don't have to spend money on vehicles, gas, and you're going to get breakfast on the way or coffee
By
most
staying
days
home,
anyway.
yeah.
I mean, honestly, it probably saves most people $30 a day minimum. But, so the State Department will now accept DoD safety and security standards, eliminating State Department inspections of military housing and shortening the time it takes to get a telework agreement approved. They really do need to work on that telework. I think they didn't want us to use the same terminology everyone else uses because it really was not something that was intended to be permanent. I mean, does that sound like tinfoil hat?
I don't
Or
know.
does that sound like
working from home seems too relaxed for the American vernacular?
I mean, maybe. I guess there's a connotation towards those jobs generally being more like telesales and things like that. So I'm wondering if that's one thing, like because of the connotation of basically,
Yeah, but telework sounds more like telemarketer to me. Just saying.
That's what I think they were. That was the connotation, But the DoD will also ensure that all required security or safety upgrades are covered by existing housing allowances, easing the burden on military families. And if you want to know more, you can check the show notes. It's a militarytimes.com article, and it's pretty and it's nice, and it uses the word tele, which confuses all of us.
Okay, tracking brain baselines from the Army Times. The Army will begin conducting a cognitive assessment for a baseline measurement of brain health to measure the effects of any future trauma for all new soldiers at basic training and cadets before they are commissioned. According to Lieutenant Colonel Randy Reddy, spokesman for the Army Center for Initial Military Training, the surface will use the automated neuropsychological assessment metrics, or ANAM tool. The ANAM assessment tool has been used on soldiers to measure pre- and post-deployment cognitive function since 2008. The 20-minute computer-based assessment records neurological activity such as attention, concentration, reaction time, memory, processing speed, and decision-making. The baseline information can be used later if the individual has an injury affecting attention, memory, or thinking ability. If a service member or civilian is exposed to a concussive event like an explosion, motor vehicle accident, or serious fall resulting in trauma to the head, their healthcare provider can request the ANAM data, which can be used to measure differences. Donald R. Thomas, a health system specialist who oversaw assessment, said in a 2018 release, testing will begin at the 4 Army training centers located at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, Fort Moore, Georgia, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So I think this is an incredible step in the right direction. Surprised to find that it said they've been doing it since 2008. But like a lot of these programs, it just takes a little bit of time to gain momentum and wider adoption. This is one of the things that like I've been advocating for, and of course, we started my brother and I, a veteran nonprofit focused on being able to identify the injury of traumatic brain injury and treat it. And so one of the things we were always really kind of petitioning for was, some kind of metric and baseline as folks were entering into the service, so you could track it over time. And while the ANAM tool sounds great for the things that it has with its neuropsychological assessment, metrics, I think on the other side of that is we also have the ability to look at biomarkers in the blood from a couple labs to be able to see where folks' hormone levels are at. And what we found doing our work was that when you have some of these injuries and events that you're really exposed to within the military, such as TBIs or head injuries from things like jumping out of airplanes and things like that. But those can disrupt your hormone function in the brain. So it might appear on one of these results as a cognitive impairment, but we actually have some tools to assess it even further, and protocols available that are not widely used within the military yet to be able to put those hormone levels back to their natural homeostasis. And when you do that, the side effects and all the symptomology that you get from these injuries starts to dissipate. So I know that's a lot there, but I think that this is really incredible. And being able to have any kind of data or metrics to return to show how folks are progressing over time is incredible for the total fitness of the force.
I love the good that this can do, but I do want to touch upon something that does scare me a little bit. What scares me about this is that due to cognitive issues progressing, sometimes the data is not complete after an initial situation and a concussive event. You're not going to get the correct data off of someone a month and a half after it happens that you're going to get 3 years later. And I'm afraid that this data and them being close to their baseline after the event is going to keep some people, or could potentially keep some people, from getting benefits that they need and deserve because they're close enough to their baseline to fall within some form of. Now, having said that, the moment that happens, you better believe the American Legion is going to jump on that like a puma. So I'm just worried about that initial group of people that have to deal with the fact that they're declining and they don't know why and they can't figure it out. And you've got the VA telling them that, no, you're still within parameters, and they're not. So, if they're not doing reassessments, I don't know exactly how they're going to implement this, but I hope that they're keeping in mind that some issues can be progressive and can be, people can deal with deterioration over time.
Man,
I
it's
think
so
you have.
funny.
Sorry, go ahead, Stacy.
No, I was thinking when you were reading this article, Adam, I was thinking, wow, this is really, really positive, because man, I would have really liked to know what my baseline was before I got blown up every subsequent time. But then when you said that, Joe, my mind just got blown, because I'm like, yeah, actually, it was 10 years after the second IED that the seizure started. So there can definitely be a delay in sort of cognitive presentations, clinical presentations. But I wonder, is this an opportunity to continue to build these baselines? So pre-exposure, exposure, then you got a baseline, and then maybe a year after that, kind of like what they're doing for the burn pits and things like that. You're going in to get periodic, monitoring to see if anything does progress. What does that look like? And will we, the collective, we as in, our generation and moving forward, now that this can be in place, provide the data needed to know what to look for and in what timeline? Like, I know that because I was a blast exposed, multiple blast exposures, that I am potentially vulnerable to having dementia, early onsets of dementia. That already runs in my family. But now that I'm a blast exposure, how much more is it critical for me to be paying attention to those early signs?
Yeah, you both bring up good points, and I think it's like, if you're looking for the data from this neuropsychological, assessment to be the end all be all to define, your total, health and fitness and wellness. Like, we just know that's not the case. And I think the points you guys are bringing up is that we're human beings that are journeying through life, and we're in a constant state of change and a constant state of environmental factors, that are affecting us. So I think, it's kind of like being a detective, and it's like the more pieces of the puzzle you have, and the more data sets that you can get a hold of can better inform, your biochemistry, experiences tied together to develop, and what some of our other guests on the show have called, and that's like a personalized protocol and plan that's right for you, because not everything and every treatment and modality and everything at a point in time is right for everybody. And so we're getting, I think, more and more away from like, this is the protocol for this injury, and more like, what is the protocol for you where you're currently at with the injuries that you have? And that's personalized medicine. And that's what we've been advocating for 10 years, and many people, before me, longer than that. So that's why, I'm excited, but we have to be cautious of, the things that you guys bring up. So it's good points.
I agree with you. And I just want to add in by saying that, like if we expect it to be the end all be all, it's not going to be, but we also need to make sure they don't expect it to be the end all be all when they're giving out ratings and things like that, because these are all issues that obviously changes, and it doesn't look that way. This is just me thinking of potential problems in the future. I love my government. I love the United States of America, and you guys have seen me literally get teary-eyed when talking to someone and say, just make it easy for me to love America. Just please help me make it easy. But the people that make this wonderful place up are still people, and so some of those people's jobs are to slow down the spending of money. So hopefully this is something that the American Legion keeps an eye on and can jump on a puma if we need them to.
Well, hats off to the team over there working on the ANAM, Automated Neuropsychological Assessment Metrics, and all the benefits that hopefully can come from that. And yeah, hopefully taking some of these things to heart as they move forward.
Celebrity veteran, FedEx founder Fred Smith. Yeah, you heard that right. Frederick Smith. Yeah, veteran, founded the multi-billion-dollar shipping company FedEx, which, by the way, not for nothing, when I was in graphics design school at Syracuse, we actually used the FedEx label as part of one of our teaching points, but that's neither here nor there. We want to hear about Mr. Smith. Anyway, it was enshrined in the Business and Aviation Halls of Fame, earned a Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts, and has been recognized as one of the greatest living business minds of the world, and has a really snazzy logo. But he thinks perhaps the most meaningful honor he has ever received was when his Marine dug a hole for him. When I was a company commander in Vietnam, it was a hard way to make a living, said Smith. We were out on operations virtually the whole time, and so I had to go up and talk to the colonel nearly every day while my troops were setting into positions, digging their fighting holes, and I'd dig my hole when I came back from the briefing. Then one night I came back and my troops had dug my fighting hole for me. They were as tired, if not more, but they took their energy to take care of me, and it was one of the best things that had ever happened to me because it told me they cared for me, they appreciated my leadership. Smith, Military Times 2024 Veteran of the Year, has long insisted that he learned more about being successful in business from his 3 years in the Marine Corps than his time at Yale Business School. The 79-year-old entrepreneur and business innovator said college helped him learn how companies work. The military taught him how people work.
The very best gift I ever got was a pizza. We were sitting around, this was Iraq, this was very late, this was after the first, Fallujah and everything. So we were had slowed down a little bit. And this was prior to Labor Day, where, it was a big event for me. And then 11 days after, when I got hurt. So we had an interpreter by the name of Sammy, and we were all sitting around talking about our favorite foods. You know how when you first deploy, you're like, I want to go to Red Lobster. I want to go somewhere and get a steak. And then like halfway through the deployment, you're like, I want a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I want to go to Wendy's and get, a junior bacon cheeseburger and a Frosty with some fries to dip in it. Like, you just want comfort, real comfort food, not nice food anymore. And I mentioned that I missed pizza, and this interpreter, went on his leave and brought back a pizza that you could not have paid me to take a bite of. But the love that was in that pizza, I cannot. He ended up getting killed the day that I got hurt. That was the vehicle I was trying to get to. So not to put a big downer on the story, but that meant so much to me, the fact that he went back and spent his money, his interpreter money that he got for putting himself in danger to help us, and brought me back the sweetest pizza I've ever seen in my life. So it did get eaten, just not by me. Sammy, we love you, buddy.
I like how he says it was one of the best things that ever happened to him, because it told me they cared for me and they appreciated my leadership. And that's not him tooting his own horn here. There's no way that those guys are digging an extra hole for the commander if he is a crap bag.
There's
know what I mean?
world.
If he's not a good leader that's taking care of those guys and fighting every day to remove the barriers and the hurdles to understanding his organization and in line with the mission, how he can help to enable them and being present and where it's hardest and most difficult. That's how you show up and be a good, humble servant leader. And when you do that, guess what? The mission goes quite well, because you took the time to be there for your folks and invest in them. And then they're going to do things like that. And so it's so simple. But the listeners probably have a story like that themselves, either where it was done for them or they did it to somebody else, because of how they took care and how they showed up. And it's ultimately, whether you know it or not, it's an expression of love. And it's quite beautiful.
I was going to add that in. That's Marine love right there. They'll dig the hole for you.
Yeah. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to share a story, just because it's coming and like I'm feeling all the feels right now, because the story I very much resonates with me. People always ask me about my military experience. And I said, staying alive was obviously a big deal. Knowing that camaraderie that you share with other people is unmatched. One of the stories that I will never forget, and we talk about this gentleman, Mr. Smith, knowing that he felt like he was a good leader because he was rewarded by his men in this way. Well, I knew a good leader, and I had been through hell the night before, and I was literally covered in blood from head to toe. It wasn't mine. By the time I rolled over to my sleeping area, I was dead on my feet, and I didn't have it in me to like burn my uniform, do all the standard protocols that you're supposed to. So I literally stripped down outside of my chew and crawled into bed until it was too hot the next morning to even stay in this space anymore. And I just did not want to get out of bed because I knew what was ahead of me. And I opened up my door and found my uniforms were missing. My boots were missing, and I immediately got really angry. So really, I didn't have a whole lot of things left on the planet, less my sanity. That was my uniform. It was my responsibility, and it was the blood of people that I served with. And as challenging as it was going to be for me to take care of that, it was supposed to be something that I would have to burden, I walked toward command because I was about to go report my stuff was missing. And as I rounded the corner, the leadership was already there burning my uniform for me. And, it's really hard to procure anything downrange. And finding boots in the size that I have was going to be really difficult. And so I was remembering feeling really upset that I'd have my last pair of boots was about to catch fire. But the first sergeant, so the commander was burning my uniform for me over the burn barrel. And the first sergeant was there with a wire brush. Cleaning my boots so that I could go to work. And that's my story. It's one of the nicest things. And I knew that love, and I felt that love in that moment. And yeah, you can't replicate that kind of stuff here.
Every one of these stories had nothing to do with anything that anybody said. Love is service. Love is showing someone how you feel. And I think love is also feeling comfortable enough to talk with people that about hard things like this and being able to share these things with each other. So we love you, Stacy, and we appreciate you. And thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Stacy. And it's like those moments as challenging and emotionally charged, but also as beautiful, and the symbolic gesture of love that emanates through it. And you realize, like, once you have those are worth more than gold.
Yeah.
And it's the most valuable treasures, that we have. So thank you for sharing one of your treasures with us today.
I mean, I think we, just sort of like touched into it, dipped our proverbial toes, which, 10, 20, 15 toes in.
I mean, my final thoughts are it's kind of like one of the things we're seeing on display right now is community and engagement, and it's a chance for us to come together. We get to go and find these interesting things that are happening within the military and veteran community or adjacent. And then we get to talk about it and share and weigh in and give our perspectives. And we get to have some really incredible guests on. But I would say that, it's really awesome from my perspective to be a part of the show, because you guys show up so authentically, and we find ways to, have the humor. But through that, like, there's a trust and a bond that forms. And so, when the time is right and the setting is right, like, there's some real therapy that's happening for each one of us as we get the opportunity to share and relate, to the content. And so I would just also translate that to the listeners and the alphas and the Legion itself, and why it's so important and valuable, because those opportunities are right there in your community. And I think that's for the people that are really engaged, like, they get it and they know that. And that's why they, continue to show up. And it's not because you're trying to glorify yourself or necessarily like your post or, your community. Like, you do through focusing outside of yourself and focusing on somebody else.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to that service-oriented mission. And so it's community, it's coming together, it's thinking and talking through these things, it's smiling through it, and it's telling real stories when the time shows up. And I think the more of that everybody gives themselves permission to do, the better we'll all be for it.
I feel stronger when I express. I feel stronger when I talk to people. I think that you get to a good, healthy mind space when you realize that you might be the Winnie Pooh in your own story, but there's a book about every character in the 100-Acre Woods, and everybody has their own story, and everybody has their own things they've had to deal with. And I think we get to the point to where we realize that everybody has their place and everybody has their story. And when you get to a point to where you feel comfortable sharing your experiences, and there's a lot of legions that are waiting for somebody like you to come in and be the piece of the puzzle that they've needed, that's missing, whether it's leadership, whether it's heart, whether it's a spirit of giving, whether it's somebody who just shows up with strength and encouragement. We all bring something completely different to this podcast. My looks, Stacy's, I can't even finish saying that. Stacy's introspective, the way she thinks, and Adam, you're so cognitive. I feel like I'm kind of like the link between you two, because I sort of sway back and forth between those two things myself. And so I feel very encouraged to be with you guys, and I feel like we bring the best out of each other in a lot of ways, especially me because of my looks. So I appreciate everything that you guys do, and for giving us opportunity to be real and be raw, even if I am hiding behind sense of humor. That's defense mechanism. Go me.
Well, Adam and Joe, thank you for letting me share that story. And for the first sergeant and the captain out there, you know who you are, and I will never forget you, and I will always appreciate you. And Alphas, hey, thank you for giving me the space to share that story. And I want you to know that it takes a lot to be vulnerable, and sometimes it's okay to share these things and to be vulnerable. And I hope you feel safe enough that if you ever need a hand, don't hesitate to reach out to me or whomever you trust in your circle. All right, Alphas. Don't forget, we have so many other episodes that we have recorded for you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Go back and listen to some of those old episodes. They're not old. They're just, they were recorded previously.
They're mature.
They're mature. They're aging like a fine wine. Subscribe to our newsletter. Send us an email. Give us some guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We will see you next week.